Today we are joined by Dr. Danielle Antoinette Hidalgo. Hi, Danielle.
Hi.
Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first, because I always, as I said, feel awkward about talking about someone when they're here. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm an Associate Professor of Sociology at California State University, Chico. So it's about 3 or so hours north of San Francisco. I just wrote a book, and I teach, sexuality classes, theory classes. I just wrote a book titled Dance Music Spaces, Clubs, Clubbers, and DJs Navigating Authenticity, Branding, and Commercialism.
So brilliant. I love that. Obviously, part of the reason why we reached out is because today's theme is authenticity. So we're really going to delve into that with you.
Can't wait.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, and also just to say again, amazing on writing a book.
Oh, thank
well
you.
Well done. And it's on such an interesting topic. But yeah, I think a good starting point, given the theme today and given your work as well, is just what do you mean when you use the term authenticity in your work?
So again, I think we're going to be talking about this a lot today. Authenticity is what is actually considered authentic is such a moving target. So the way I think about authenticity is I'm interested in when it is, when somebody's called authentic, when something somebody does is considered authentic, when it's considered real, whatever. I'm interested in what is produced in that. So I'm interested in when there's like a sense of authenticity, what's coming out of that. And the other way I was thinking about authenticity, so that way, but also, if we think about Tammy Anderson's work, the Rave book that she wrote so many years ago, I think it was 2009, she asked for more research where there's like, where you're seeing spaces where there's kind of both rave authenticity and EDM club culture commercialism happening. Like she was asking for more research where potentially that might be happening, like socially and culturally. And so I took her up on that. I was like, all right, I'm seeing that there's still ways that this kind of plur, rave, ethos, authenticity, expectation is happening. But then there's also so much freaking commercialism. Like, when is it happening together? And when it happens together, what the hell is going on? So I took her up on that. I started seeing so many different things in physical spaces. And then, of course, I started seeing all kinds of combinations of both rave authenticity and EDM club culture commercialism online. So I always describe it as a moving target, that it's really difficult to define. But it's so interesting when people even use the word, right? Like, oh, that's so authentic. That's so genuine. Or when, folks say things like, oh, I'm just trying to be real. And there's so much of that now. So, as I started thinking through authenticity in dance music, I started hearing it everywhere.
Yeah.
And now I see it and hear it everywhere. So there are people online like Emma Chamberlain. I don't know if you know who she is, but there's all this talk that they love, she became a YouTube star because she's authentic and she's real. But then she started doing all these interviews and telling people, oh no, my 15-minute real video takes me 40 hours. So I'm performing realness and I'm doing it really well and I've made myself famous. And I have like brand things going on now and I sell coffee and whatever. So I'm just endlessly fascinated in what authenticity is producing these days, both in dance music and really kind of elsewhere too. Yeah.
I think this is actually the Chamberlain example is a perfect one to follow on from what you just talked about to what do you think is the relationship between authenticity and branding?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So what I started seeing, and this is really kind of how I developed, we were talking about this outside, my concept I came up with, authenticity maneuvering. What I saw is that as, I saw a lot of, and I got this, my partner, he worked for an advertising agency, and he's like, these DJs are building their brands, Danielle. You need to pay attention to how they're building their brands. And so I did. And I was also like, okay, so they're building their brands and they're doing a lot of it online and it's taking a lot of work. But then also, as they're building their brands, there are clubs building their brands. Like that's happening. And what I'll be looking at into the future is how clubbers are building their personal brands and how that overlaps or connects with the DJs and the clubs. And so what I was interested in seeing is, okay, they're brand building, but in their brand building, what is the kind of authenticity work that they're what's the authenticity imperative in building their brand? So there's an imperative for building your brand a particular way given a plur-rave ethos happening, but then there's also this expectation to do a particular kind of authenticity work being on these platforms. So that's why, I saw the connections. I was like, okay, I'm seeing brand building happening here. I'm seeing it happening here. And it's all very much connected to a sense of authenticity. So it's all interconnected. And I was also reading, I don't know if you're familiar with Sarah Benet Weiser's book. It's called Authentic TM. It's so good. So there are 3 different ways she talks about branding. She talks about brand cultures. And she's got like a really nice definition of brand cultures. She calls it's a relationship between consumers and the commercial world. And it's really the way in which these relationships have increasingly become cultural context for everyday living, individual identity, and affective relationships and relations. And so there were like 3 different ways I was thinking about the branding for the DJs in particular, because if you read my book, there's a lot of, I'm obviously going to the physical clubs and I'm following the DJs, but then I'm also, and it's 3 DJs I really focused on for the book. I focused on TBM, Honey Dijon, and Peggy Gou, and I can talk about that later. That there's a reason why I stumbled upon them, and then they became part of the story. But there were 3 different ways that Sarah Benet Weiser talks about branding in her book, and I was seeing all this for the DJs. I was like, oh, I can finally make sense of what the heck I'm seeing them doing. So the first way is it's really thinking about branding and brand building as kind of the work that they're doing, marketing, building their products and also their consumers. So it's really connection between marketing, product, consumers. So marketing would be them marketing themselves and their music. Products would be like, the merch that they're selling, the music that they're selling, the shows that they're selling, right? And then consumers would be literally their fans, right? So how that, they have to constantly be thinking about those 3 things and addressing those 3 things as they're building their brand. And that it's ongoing and that it changes with context and it can look different, doing that kind of work in the US versus the UK, etc. The other way that I was thinking about branding, and this is again from Sarah Benet Weiser, is that, not just to think about branding as just, she talks about it as like gross commercialization, that, oh, let's just write that off. That's just commercial, right? That branding is both, it's like there's this economic imperative that's getting attached to, oh no, I'm real. I'm not just selling you myself. There's this authenticity thing happening as well. So it's like, she talks about brand cultures as being really ambivalent because it's like, you're doing something you really love. That's why you're buying those shoes, or you're telling me about this music that you consume because you really love it. It's like something that pulls at your heartstrings. So you're not really just like consuming something else. And then the other way she talks about branding is and here, I'm going to read it too because it's so good. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I see with these pages. Holy shit. She talks about it as something becomes brandable when it inspires affect and emotion from individuals. And I say a process that is needed to create a relationship between the branding company and consumers. This is totally happening with the DJs, right? I mean, I'm totally guilty of it too. I adore TBM. I think she's wonderful, right? And so the more she's able to pull up my heartstrings with her music and with what she does in the industry, the more she is building her brand in a way that's like, got me on board and all the rest of her fans on board. So there's this emotionality of branding that Bené Weiser does a really nice job of highlighting, that I think is just so closely connected to the way that DJs talk about their work, right? They talk about loving their fans. Clubbers talk about feeling blissful on the dance floor. Like, it just, the brand stuff that's going on very closely connects to people talking about their experience in these spaces. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does lead us on nicely to, you kind of finished with thinking about people's experience in the space. So yeah, I mean, you talked already about like the different bodies or like places where authenticity can be found. You talked about like DJs or like clubbers or spaces or like club nights, I guess.
Yeah.
And thinking, I guess, maybe continuing on the level of people, can you give us any examples from your book of how people might act out authenticity, which I think you have touched on in the brand stuff, but maybe like zooming out a little bit?
Yeah. So, and again, right, this is a moving target. But no, and it is. And sometimes it's like, oh, is that an authenticity thing that's happening there or not? I don't really know. But what I found is, again, I was again building off of Anderson's work, and I was like, okay, she's talking about both rave authenticity things happening and commercialism things happening. And so I started kind of like thinking about being careful, but thinking about, okay, when are things that are considered authentic, like when am I seeing those things happening on these dance floors? And then when are things that are like considered commercial or get like a lot of heat, like a lot of critique, like being disconnected on the dance floor, like harassment behavior, like, all the smartphones on the dance floor, like all that kind of stuff. What, like, when I'm seeing that stuff happening, what's going on, right? And so what I found some patterns, right? So, like when smartphones were being used a whole lot on these dance floors, when there wasn't really like policies to really make sure people were really present and really connected with each other, there was a lot more pushing and shoving, and there was a lot more of like kind of some harassing behavior happening that are in my field notes, right? That it was like, no, this feels less nice. This feels less connected. The other thing that I was seeing for the DJs, so if we think about like rave authenticity and the DJs kind of constructing the spaces, like back to the authenticity maneuvering, when Honey Dijon was like, saying how she thinks it's BS that people have so many smartphones on the dance floor. What was that like what did that give her access to? What was she able to do with her music when she did that, when she was going on and on about that? What was she able to, again, like I was telling you, what authenticity maneuvering can do for these DJs. When these DJs do a really, really nice job of, like I call it like masterful authenticity maneuvering, when they're able to like be, again, quote unquote, be considered real or be performing realness and saying things like, yeah, it's freaking BS. These spaces are super heteronormative and white, and they're a bunch of fucking bullshit sometimes. And I'm going to say that out loud. And it's good she's saying it, but what it often does is, sometimes with the DJs, is it allows them to focus on that kind of talk, which is really important, but they're doing a whole bunch of commercial things that don't get recognized because they're doing the authenticity work so well. They're just saying all the right stuff, and they're talking about being so like, I'm an old school DJ, I've been in this scene forever. They're essentially doing very similar things to like what Peggy Gou does, right? With the very commercial stuff she does. She does all the branding, but they don't get called out for it. And in fact, when they're doing that kind of work, right? Like when they're doing the branding and they're doing advertisements, they often continue doing the authenticity maneuvering and talking about being in the scene for as long as they have or whatever. And so any super commercial stuff that they're doing literally at the moment, literally the advertisement, like maybe for Calvin Klein, they don't get called out for it. It doesn't happen.
So they are able to use authenticity to prevent, or authenticity maneuvering rather, as you call it, to prevent people from calling them sellouts, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff again, I was just, there were many months I spent, maybe a year, where I was so confused. I was like, wait, they're all doing the same thing, but why are people, well, they get away with it, and certain folks aren't. Like, what else are they doing that's allowing them to get away with this?
I was just thinking, as you were talking about different things really, but one of the things I was thinking about is that essentially most people are doing authenticity maneuvering in different ways. Obviously it means different things for different parties in the game. You know, DJs will do it one way, clubbers will do it another way.
Sure. But
I'm thinking about the influence of sort of digital platforms on the push to create brands for all of us. Like we are all, you know, we all need to create an individual brand if we have social media. If it affects people in different industries, academics too. And so it's just about thinking of like, you know, you are your brand, you're this kind of individual brand that you're building, and what you project, what you put out is how you want to be perceived and understood. And if you're not perceived as authentic or, you know, by the rules of whatever industry or whatever game you play, whatever
which again shifts depending on what we're talking about.
Then, you know, and the pressure is there, I think, for clubbers, for clubs, and for DJs and beyond. So I guess my next kind of question is about, you know, is there a difference that you've observed in terms of, in terms of how different parties do that, you know, DJs versus clubs versus clubbers, or is it kind of aligned in the kind of mechanisms? Are they sort of similar?
I mean, I can compare parties. So you know, and I was gonna reread my conclusion, but I'll just try to bring up what I went over in my conclusion. You know, one of the things that you kind of see with these parties, so this is my new research, right? You know, when I pre-pandemic, when I did like my last research trip, I noticed that there was this thing that was happening with the parties I went to, where they were literally using like the, you know, rave authenticity kind of ideas, like house music gives us life or whatever, house music and love. I mean, just these sayings that I talk about in the book. And they were literally, that was how they were branding their party and how they were selling it to the consumers. And it just felt really inauthentic to me. It felt like it felt especially inauthentic because the actual experience of the club didn't feel connected, right? I mean, there were all these different examples I had of getting pushed and shoved, and that, you know, people all had their phones out. People were, you know when that feeling in a, like the Eris Drew show I went to the other night, right? At Corsica Studios. People didn't have their phones out. It wasn't like a sea of, flood of phones, a sea of phones. We were so in it. We were like in the water with her. We were swimming with her. I mean, it's just like, I guess you know when you know. And so it felt like this branded thing that was happening for the party I was describing before, where it didn't align with what was actually being experienced at the party. And that happened it wasn't just that place. It happened in a number of other places. And then there's this other thing that can happen at typically I've been finding it at smaller clubs, right? Where there's actually not all that much work that's being done to build the brand, like to say, oh, we're so authentic, right? But there's like this intentionality about the space. Like there are all this signage that says, hey, we don't like put up with harassing behavior, and like we're gonna follow through on that. And you see it happening. And then when you actually get on the dance floor, clubbers are like, actually, like they bump you and they say something like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not just gonna, run over you and get really drunk and whatever. I hopefully you all know what I'm talking. I mean, I've been to like so many of these parties now.
We know.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about. Okay.
It reminds me of this tweet I saw by this person I followed that said, like, I tweet for the girlies who apologize to you on the dance floor.
Yes,
it's like,
that's exactly. Yes. So I would be interested in a tweet like that, right?
Yeah.
That's also doing this work, right?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's like people, again, like that thing that happened recently at Fabric where Michael, I don't know Michael's last name.
Yeah, he got
filmed. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting what's been happening online with like people policing bad behavior like that in a way that I think speaks to these patterns that we're seeing. And also, I mean, not just the patterns, but the problems that DJs are talking about seeing, clubbers are talking about seeing and experiencing. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah,
sounds like the no phones thing is important. Maybe we can come back to that.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I think something that you said that I really liked was, you're frustrated at when you like see a big club perhaps like posting something like, this space is about love, this music represents love, like kind of, saying that's what it is. But then going to the space and thinking, no,
what's going on
yeah,
here?
like, and
this feels like a frat party.
Yeah.
Why am I here? What is happening?
Yeah, and to me it sounds like the difference, I guess, between kind of saying something to try and make it so versus trying to like capture the thing that is happening through language after the fact. Does that make sense? Like kind of saying, this is about love, like hopefully that's enough to make it be about love, versus like trying to find the language which as you've said is challenging to do because it's slippery, it's hard to pin down. It's kind of like you said, if you know kind of thing. Where it's like more capturing what it is rather than attempting to impose what it is beforehand and then feeling that jarring mismatch.
And also just trying to make sense of, like, back to the platformization, the digital platforms. Like, how are these clubs want to stay open and they want people to come to their parties. But sometimes they're lying to us. Or maybe oftentimes they're lying to us. And then when it actually feels unsafe, or it actually feels like I am experiencing some real harassment, I get angry. I'm like, this is a bunch of bullshit. Like, why? No, you can't keep saying this. So I've been really, really interested in, and again, of course, going back to those clubs, the ones that I don't like so much, just to continue studying what I'm seeing happening. But then also, like, you find these pockets of wonderful places and you're like, okay, I gotta go there as much as possible for the rest of my life. And then also just being interested in, I think they feel like they don't have to do as much work because they know that their club is pretty much all right. And they're actually, speaking or doing what they say they want to do to make people feel okay in the club.
So that they don't have to invest as heavily in the kind of branding and digital platforms in order to attract punters, because they can rely on a culture building around them that recognizes that they're good places for producing authentic club experiences.
Producing like a real. I know nobody uses plur anymore. I know it's cheesy, that whole thing. But I mean, there's this ethos that people do often reference. Right, the like connecting ethos, right? That we gotta treat each other well here, and DJs use it constantly. Just any quick look at Facebook or Instagram, and you can see it. People talking about we need to treat each other well. But of course, like there's all this, there's some really good work, and there's going to be a lot of new good work coming out on this. Is that you can say all day that a place should be, inclusive and loving and all the rest of it, and then there's still a bunch of problems. So, like, if you read, that part of my book where I talk about actually when a space is constructed by so many as loved up, or as, like this is from Fiona Hutton's work, as, less heteronormative and all the rest of it. What I found in my research that often happened is like, okay, so this space is supposed to be so welcoming, et cetera, et cetera. Well, harassment still does happen, and it can sometimes, like she talks about going underground, right? Like, it's subtle, it can be covert, the harasser can get away with it because you're not quite sure what's going on if you're being harassed. And so that actually makes more work for the person who's being harassed, because they have to, first of all, figure out what's going on, and then second of all, try to very carefully maneuver out of it. And that I think that needs to be better addressed. That's really what I found in my work.
Yeah, I think there's like an incentive not to address it, almost in a way, not in a like perhaps malicious or badly intended way, just because it's scary to know that harassment still exists when the vibe is good, when it feels right. It's like, wow, if it even still exists here, if we can't just eliminate it by a true desire to look out for each other and that feeling coming through, then how do we eliminate it? Yeah.
That's scary to even think about it. I know. Yeah. So,
But no, but like, yeah, just because it's scary doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it, of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, I do what I'm sure you all are familiar with, this autoethnography. So I really put myself in there, and I'm like, I write these field notes, and then I'm like, okay. At the moment, I sometimes don't think to do something, and then I read this thing like months later. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I report that person? Why didn't I like go up to the bar and say, that person needs to leave?
Yeah.
Like, they've touched me too many times.
Yeah.
They don't get to be here anymore. Like, if they're doing it to me, they're doing it to other people.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Anyway, there's a lot of thinking about things in retrospect that happened kind of as I was writing my book and going through all my work, my research.
It makes me think we should, like, everyone should be note-taking about their experiences and reflecting after the fact. And that might be helpful. So I guess I can't ask. Everyone should become an autoethnographer.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But also kind of, yes.
Yeah. Sounds great. I'm on board. Maybe we should put some notes in the toilet saying, you should take some notes of your experience.
Take some notes of what's going on for you.
Do some reflection.
Do it on your notes app. We all have a notes app.
My friend used to call it ethnogratification.
Oh man. Yeah.
Amazing.
I wanted to kind of come back to one final point about digital platforms. Do you think that part of the mismatches, or these kind of like controversies or conflict between authenticity in theory and then in practice also come from the model
itself, the algorithm?
The
Absolutely.
algorithm, and just what digital platforms are sort of
we're talking about capitalism here.
Yeah,
we're talking about,
of course.
And this is why. So I'm gonna call out some people that if you're interested in more work on platformization, I'm just like totally obsessed with these folks right now. Zoe Glatt, her name's Zoe Glatt. She just finished her PhD at LSE. She's just doing really incredible work on platformization. So I've been reading all of, as much as I can of her stuff, and just also following her on Twitter because she's always got really smart things to say. And also Emily Hund just wrote a book called The Influencer Industry. It's so wonderful. And I connected with her, and I told her, your work is really helping me think through like how this is happening for DJs now. So part of back to even our personal brands, we are helping these companies stay big. Oh my God. Like all that stuff we post on Instagram and Twitter.
It's like we're dependent on, like we're sort of like reluctantly dependent on it, whilst at the same time also being twisted into a particular way of thinking, isn't it? Or
but we're also connecting. Like it's not all bad.
It's not
right?
all bad, yeah.
Right.
It's not all bad.
I mean, this is how we met.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So
yeah.
and in fact, I mean, I was intentional. I was very much not on Twitter before I wrote my book, and then I had my pre-sale, and I was like, okay, shit, I got to get on Twitter. So I got on Twitter, and then you found me. And that's how I found Zoe, right? This is how I found Hun. This is how I even found out about those books.
Yeah. And that's why we keep going back to them, because we want connection.
We do.
Clubs and digital platforms.
We do. We want the connection with Eris Drew and, you know, the whole party the other night, and we want the connection online. We want all of that. And some of those connections are really beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
But we got to think critically about, you know, how we are in this space, and it's not always good for us. Or it's, I don't know, maybe that's not fair. It's something we have to think really critically about, I think.
Yeah.
For sure.
And then also, I mean, the thing that's been come up, you know, as I've been, and I wrote about this in the book, and I'll continue thinking about it, the DJs, all the work that they have to do with their online.
It's a lot.
And then the mental health, like there's, Hai wrote something about, like years ago about, gosh, it's been, and TBM talks about this a lot too, the Blessed Madonna. People saying really shit things to me online. I had to talk to my therapist about that. Like, it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about being online too for that reason. Like, I don't want to get trolled. I know Peggy Gou gets trolled. Peggy Gou got trolled through me. Like, I was so protective. Yeah, so Resident Advisor posted about my book. You'll see it. She got trolled.
Wow.
Oh, no.
With some bullshit. And I was like, and I've been pretty critical of Peggy Gou in my book, and I got really protective of her when she got trolled. I was like, no, fuck you. You can't say that. You can't talk about how she's not authentic. You can't say that about her to that's huge audience of like 20,000 people who saw that tweet. You don't get to do that. I don't know who the troll was. I don't remember, but we can find them.
The trouble is you never know who they are, because
I
sometimes
know.
they just
They
use
always have like
anonymous accounts or something.
right? They always have no followers.
That's really interesting though, like your own like kind of investment in it and this person, and the feeling of protectiveness, like really interesting to think about.
I was really upset for her, for the whole thing. I got really angry.
Yeah.
And it was directed at her and me, but it was definitely more her.
But it's also like recognizing that I guess DJs themselves have a lot of negotiating to do, and so you're not, when you're being critical of the fact that they have to engage with authenticity and commercialism, you're not speaking from like a judgmental place. You're speaking from a place of wanting to understand what goes on.
Yeah.
But at the same time also accept, like also respecting them and their work, and the fact that they're also they believe in community, they believe in the music, in the scene and stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's a risk of like closing off to there's a risk. I'm thinking about a certain pie. There's a risk of closing yourself off to criticism, or not being open, and not even necessarily like criticism in a negative way. Like like to be critical of something doesn't even mean like to interrogate it. There's a risk of being so defended or defensive against it that you can't think, okay, what is being said? Why might that be being said? And then, perhaps you do disagree after reflecting, but also perhaps you think, oh, actually, maybe there is something here. Maybe I can bring that in and be affected by it in whatever way I am.
Well, I mean, something that's, of course, so here, I'll just say it this way. When I originally published a book, I was so worried about the critiques I had made of these DJs, right? Because I do respect them, and I want them to be okay, and I want them to thrive, and not just them, but the other people I follow and love, and I love their music. But TBM contacted me and exchanged with me, and she said, it doesn't matter what you did, you've contributed to a conversation. Like, thank you for that. And it really it was like, oh God, this is why I love her so much. But I've also critiqued her like
authentic.
I know. See, we get it's constant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
Oh.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, thank you so much for talking to us.
You're
It's
welcome.
super interesting.
I feel like I learned so much.
Yeah, same.
Oh, good.
And my like neurons were like shooting in all different directions, which is good because they don't do that as often as I'd like them to. Thank you, Danielle.
Oh, good. Thank you.